And next up, from our very kind sponsors for the evening, from Vocalink, we have David Divitt.
Right, thank you very much. I'm going to use, I think, my 8 minutes to talk mostly about relationships. But to get a better sense of what I mean by relationships and what kind of relationships I mean, it's a good idea for me to explain a little bit about who Vocalink is and what we've been doing for the last couple of years within the analytics department within Vocalink. Vocalink is the operator of quite a few of the UK's payment systems. So faster payments, BACS, the Link ATM system, checks. The data flows through our rails. It's not ours by default. It belongs to the banks. It belongs to the schemes. But we are the operators, and therefore, with the right permissions in place, we can start to look at that data and do interesting things with it. And this is the stuff I'll talk about today is some of the first, I guess, most interesting things that we've been looking at over the last couple of years. So we started a couple of years ago with the banks in the UK, and the premise was, what can we do at a network level to tackle financial crime? How can we use the data and the relationships in that data to tackle financial crime? And I know a few of the speakers have mentioned things like data quality, and I don't want to make you all jealous, but the data quality in our system is extremely, extremely good. And that's just, it's by the nature of what we do, right? So we run payments, we run national critical infrastructure, which has to be perfect or things go very wrong. So yes, we have an extreme amount of data that runs through the systems, but it's the quality of that data that really lets us do some really amazing things. And when you're looking at financial crime in particular, data quality is key because the signals that differentiate a legitimate payment from an illegitimate one can be extremely minor. And so small problems with the data can actually give you false signals. So what are we talking about? We're talking about lots of payments, payments to and from people, payments to and from businesses, flowing through our system. Some of them are very, very fast, like the faster payment system. Some of them are slower, like when you get paid your wages, they go over a slower system. But it gives us lots of data to work with, lots of points to look at, and lots of really amazing relationships in that data, and that's what we've been working on. So imagine we start from a fraud or a scam, and we build some algorithms that take that initial fraud, let's call it a seed, and we grow a tree from that seed. So the tree becomes the flow of those illicit funds as they move through a fast payment system like faster payments. So the aim of this, and this is what we started a couple of years ago, was to figure out what kind of things can we uncover? Can we uncover networks of money launderers? How do they behave? What are the patterns in that data? And it's an unfortunate part of this. The faster we let things move, the faster the criminals can move as well. And when that data disappears, or when that money disappears from an account, from a victim, it's very, very difficult to get it back. And it gets used for a lot of pretty terrible things. So that was the premise of the work we did, started on a couple of years ago. So this is the type of thing that comes out of that. I'll explain a little bit how you read this, just so you can understand. Each of the horizontal swim lanes are a bank account, a UK bank account. They're grouped by color by the bank. So you can see there's a couple in the top orange bank, 4 or 5, 4 in the blue bank, and 1 down here in the pink bank. Now, the very left of these are our dispersion trees. The very left is a victim. They lost, in this case, £18,000 to a scam or a fraud. So what we did then is mapped out what happened after that. And you can see right away, almost within minutes, they start taking the funds and firing them up to another account back in the originating bank, different account, but the same bank. And every one of those payments decreases by £1. So it starts 985, 984, 983, and they're doing 2 or 3 payments a minute. So we're pretty sure this is scripted. It's probably not a human at the end of the keyboard. And then when they've exhausted almost all of the funds that went into this account, they split it up into 3 or 4 payments into 3 or 4 different accounts and get rid of it again. So they're hiding the source, they're obfuscating where it originated, and they're making it very difficult to trace that back. Let me flip to the next one because we'll run out of time very quickly here. You may have all heard a little bit about this ongoing Loom pyramid scam that's going on. We actually picked up on this quite a while ago, and this is what that looks like when you try to map the network of accounts. So this started with a £100 reported disputed transaction that we ran through the algorithm, and you can see it generated 1,500 transactions at 200 or 300 different accounts. But what you can see clearly here is there are some accounts that get used over and over again. So what we do is we run this through our system and we alert the banks to all of these accounts that are potential money mules within their system. And then they can go ahead and investigate those and shut them down quicker than they would have been able to if you're just looking at the individual account activity. So we're using relationships to put these things together and to try to explain the risk in the system. This is a really interesting one we did as well. Any guesses for what it is, feel free to shout it out. But let me explain it to you. So this one looks at the relationships rather than the flow. So what we've got is a number of these yellow kind of sources of funds. They're feeding in through these pink transmitting accounts. They're going into the middle of this little symbol, this little motif in the middle, and he's paying out to all of the ones around it. So we've got funneling of funds into the middle and then paying out. And when we looked at the transactions behind this, we saw this was a Bitcoin Ponzi scheme that was actually shut down in the US at some point. This was a UK branch of it. And so if you think about a Ponzi scheme, it's actually quite a perfect representation. You've got your first line investors getting paid out with the proceeds from the ones here, the second line. And this is the way we think visualizing the data is a really, really important way of training your eye towards the most interesting patterns. If you were to try to pick that out from raw data itself, you end up essentially having to try to guess what is going on by numbers alone, and as soon as you visualize it, you get a much better view of that. We build this is part of a much, much larger visualization that we've done. We actually have an interactive visualization that we can zoom in and out of, and we show essentially all of the money laundering activity in the UK. And it's quite an interesting thing to look at. It's really interesting to see how it evolves over time as well, and how if you basically start from the center of this pattern and step out this is basically 3 generations from the center. So you can see how incredibly complicated and organized and quick they are able to transmit money. The one thing that we see here is that it is organized. It is incredibly organized, and we can't kind of just assume that these are small lone actors working alone in a basement somewhere. Obviously that happens, but the real stuff happens at a very organized level. It doesn't only happen in kind of money laundering or consumer to consumer fraud. We've done a lot of work looking at business fraud. This is kind of showing the risk to businesses of things like CEO and invoice redirection fraud. It's a big problem, and it's a really interesting problem because you can see the risk is actually very well distributed. It's not obvious. There's not pockets of things that are that you could write a rule to detect. You really need to look at the data at a massive scale to detect this type of fraud. So final few seconds, I'd say that this type of approach and the algorithms we're using, we started with financial crime, but it's definitely not the only thing that can be used. We think we can use this data to trace other things. We think especially we could use the payments data to do things like economic intelligence and to help in that area as well. So it's hopefully the first of many things that we get to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, David. So, do we have any questions? So we've got a question down the front here. Any more? We've got another question down the front here. So let's start with those 2 questions.
Jeremy Fisher from Ofgem. With the very pretty examples you've shown us, did you discover those by data mining, or were you provided with clues that allowed you to build your diagrams?
I'll remember that. Okay.
Louisa from the Data Science Campus. What I really want to ask is, can I have your data?
Yeah.
I just wondered what other information, so you've got the flow, how much is being transferred, and the business or the person. What else do you know about the transaction?
I'll talk about that. Okay, so the very first thing we did when we built the initial algorithms, we were given these seeds, these confirmed frauds and scams from the banks, and they gave us tens of thousands of them. So we used those to start to build out the network. And the trick to all of this turned out not to be how do you follow the funds, but it's how do you stop following the funds? Because if you imagine, a lot of people in here are maybe paying bills, even if they are fraudsters, money launderers, they might be paying bills, they might, it's very easy to network the entire UK. So the trick was actually starting from all of these frauds and scams, run some algorithms and then tune it based on looking at the data and really mining the data to look at, okay, where does the long tail kind of get to a point where we'll cut it off here because we're at too much risk of networking everybody together. So that was the beginning. What we're doing now that we're running it is we're looking at saying, well, now we're getting very good at figuring out what is a suspicious motif. This thing here, that's suspicious. It doesn't happen in nature very often. So we're saying, well, we can start to look at the data as a whole and then pick these things out without having a seed to start from. So essentially looking at if we build everything and then pick out the pockets based on motif detection, as I like to say, then we can start to look at getting closer and closer to being right up front in real time and predictive and all of that. So yeah, this was the what else is available. So this is all built on transaction data. Transaction data in the payment space is relatively lean, especially account-to-account payments. Card payments have quite a bit more data, including locations and that kind of thing, whereas we don't have that. So we have literally who it came from, where did it go. Think about what you fill out when you send a payment yourself. So it's actually quite a limited data set. We don't actually know if an account is a business or not. It's not part of the transaction. We do some inference as part of this, and the algorithm has some inference built in to decide, does it look like a business? What does it look like? What other things can we infer from the data? But in general, the data is pretty lean. Lean and clean.
Next set of questions. So we've got one in the front here and then another one in the back there.
Hi, my name is Mallory. I'm from the Prime Minister's Implementation Unit. You've mentioned how you have helped inform banks in their own investigative processes and preventing sort of further financial crime through using this. Have you looked at all at how you support police forces who struggle to investigate complex financial crime, or what that relationship might look like?
Yes. Is there another one, or do you want to?
Yeah, related question actually. I wondered whether what successes you'd had and to what extent you'd found things that other parties, such as financial investigators, were completely unaware of.
Sure. Okay, yes, so law enforcement, we think, will play a key role in this. Because the data belongs to the banks, we've obviously started there, and that's been kind of, let's build the base and let's build the foundation for something. We've definitely had a number of conversations with law enforcement who, understandably would love to get involved. Especially because right now the approach tends to be, if there's suspicious activity, it gets sent to the law enforcement for investigation, but there's no kind of overall analysis that puts it together or that helps them prioritize. And we'd like to help them prioritize their investigations to say, if you're investigating this account versus this account, which one should you prioritize? Well, if we're looking at it as a whole, we can help you do that. So it's not happening today, but it's definitely one of the objectives that I'd like to see come of this. In terms of things that have been discovered, so we don't find the outcome of all of these things because obviously there's some sensitive investigations that go on, but we do track kind of the number of accounts that get successfully shut down, and in particular we're interested in the number of net new mule accounts that we find, and there's been a significant number of net new accounts even from the first week of turning it on. There were new mule accounts that were previously unknown that had been detected by the solution and then shut down. I think one of the really interesting things we found is that we might generate an alert on a relatively normal looking account that the transaction on its own looks benign. But when the banks do their own investigation and look at link analysis within their own data sets, so looking at all of the other bits of information they see on an account that we don't, they have uncovered some very large rings attached to these accounts with 50, 60, 70 other mules attached to that one account. So it's almost like this kind of, as people poke their head above the parapet to maybe get a bit of money, And normally that would go unnoticed, but this won't let that happen, and they'll pick up on that, do some further analysis, and be able to actually detect the wider rings of activity that are happening.
We've definitely got time for another set of questions, just under 2 minutes. Blimey, okay. Let's go for the two in this row to start with. We might get through another set if we're very lucky.
Try to be quick.
I'm Ruth Ward from HM Treasury. I'm just curious, you're talking a lot here about using the system to track financial crime, and obviously that's a really big and important issue. But whether you've looked at applying it to any other questions, mapping transactions through the economy sounds quite similar to looking at traffic on the roads, say, and what Louisa was talking about earlier. So is there an economic indicator potential here?
Sure.
Hi, Matthew Trimming. We know that the ONS is interested in your data.
Not our data. Yeah, well, the bank's data. I'll be very clear.
Data they don't have. Are you interested in public sector data sets that you would like to get your hands on, and why?
Absolutely. Yeah, so the first question about applying the technique to other things, absolutely, we'd love to do it. We think this data set would be a really, really interesting one to apply to economic things. And, you know, we've done some internal studies looking at things like liquidity forecasting and that type of thing, but you can broaden that. If you imagine, you know, a very, very high proportion of the wage payments for the UK go through these systems. So you can get a very, very good and real-time indicator of what's going on. In terms of, other data sets, yes. I mean, my data science guys are always drooling for whatever data they can get their hands on. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so absolutely, we would love to marry some of these things together and see what else we could do. It's looking for the right use case, I think.
Excellent. I think we'd probably better leave that one there. But David, thank you very much indeed.